The story centers around a young man named Takuto who spent most of his time absorbed in a strategy game called Eternal Nations. Confined to a hospital bed, Takuto found solace and meaning only in playing Eternal Nations and eventually died with the game still running. But his death wasn't final. Moments later, he opens his eyes, finding himself sitting on a throne amid ancient ruins in a forest. His first thought is about how incredibly fresh and real the air feels. Suddenly, a woman approaches him, gently asking if he's finally awake. When she reveals her face, Takuto instantly recognizes her as Atu, an elven character from Eternal Nations. Atu respectfully calls him Your Majesty, leaving Takuto utterly confused, wondering what on earth is happening. As an experienced anime fan, he quickly figures out he must have somehow been transported into the world of Eternal Nations, the very game world he spent countless hours in. But this realization brings more questions. Typically, Atu would only address her king this way if he were the Lord of Manara, the nation Takuto previously led in the game. Atu speaks again, this time calling him Takuto-sama, and explains further. She mentions Takuto is the first ever player to conquer nightmare difficulty using Manara, widely known as the toughest civilization in the game. She proudly reveals that Takuto is listed on the game's global leaderboards, giving him legendary status. Takuto's confusion deepens even further. How can a mere game character know about things beyond her own game world reality? And Atu gently explains that she remembers everything, every victory, every defeat, each word Takuto ever spoke to her through his screen, and the entire journey they shared together until now. Hearing this, Takuto is overcome with emotion, tears forming in his eyes. He tells Atu how happy he is to finally speak to her directly, confessing she was always his favorite character in Eternal Nations. Atu warmly replies that she feels precisely the same way. Still, none of this clarifies how he ended up here, so Takuto looks at Atu directly and asks if it was she who brought him into this world. Atu honestly admits she has no clue how they got here, as she herself only arrived a few minutes ago. Still, she's certain of one thing: the place they're in feels exactly like the world of Eternal Nations. Regardless of their location, Atu is deeply grateful she's finally met her true king in person. Holding Takuto's hands gently, she urges him to begin their journey anew together. Atu shares her dream of rebuilding an empire with just the two of them, and since Takuto has nothing else left, he gladly agrees to join her quest. When Takuto extends his hand to formally shake on their partnership, Atu suddenly switches to her NPC persona, introducing herself dramatically as Sludge Atu, an illegitimate child born of a fallen world. She solemnly pledges her entire being, mind, soul, and body entirely to Takuto. Though Atu's character is technically evil, the theatrics feel painfully cliché, leaving both her and Takuto momentarily embarrassed. Still, Takuto decides to lean into it, dramatically declaring that alongside Atu, his trusted right hand, he'll establish Manara, the most sinister empire of them all. Takuto then turns to Atu, asking if she remembers what Manara must always do first. Proudly, Atu states they should hide themselves away completely, staying unseen like true recluses to avoid discovery. Taking action immediately, Takuto summons an emergency production scout, a strange insect-like creature with extremely long legs. Given Manara's alignment with evil and destruction, all their units naturally look horrifying, including this scout. Regardless, Takuto issues commands instructing it to thoroughly investigate their surroundings, and Atu sternly reminds it that disappointing their king isn't an option. And obediently, the scout departs on its assigned task. Takuto then reveals to Atu that he can actually see through the scout's eyes, confirming to both of them that the world indeed works just like the game. He briefly explains to Atu how summoning works here. His current total magic power is at 200 MP, and creating the scout consumed 100 MP. Takuto carefully considers his options for spending his remaining magic points. Building a base would cost only 20 MP, but he also wonders if he should prioritize defense by summoning a warrior. Unfortunately, doing so would consume more power than he currently possesses. In Eternal Nations, Atu is classified as a hero character, making her particularly powerful in combat. But since their new journey has barely begun, Atu's current strength level remains only at level 3, which is quite low. Anyway, thanks to the scout's reconnaissance, Takuto gains a clear picture of their surroundings, which primarily consists of endless forests. So this setting proves an ideal location for establishing Manara's base, though Atu finds it unsettling that there's absolutely no wildlife or available food nearby. Realizing it would be too dangerous to relocate, Takuto instructs the scout to extend its search and explore an even wider perimeter. Atu then begins feeling downhearted, believing she's not contributing enough to assist her king. Seeing her discouraged expression, Takuto gently reassures her, saying that simply having her by his side is more than enough. Deeply touched by his sincere words, Atu instantly becomes even more devoted to him. Meanwhile, their scout soon discovers a campsite inhabited by a group of dark elves. Takuto hesitates, unsure what their next move should be because accidentally encroaching on another group's territory could cause serious problems, so he figures it's best for them to lay low for now. And Two suggests optimistically that if things do take a turn for the worse, they can simply escape together. Her encouragement boosts Takuto's confidence, so they decide to quietly observe the dark elves from a safe distance and find out what they're doing here. But suddenly, 3 dark elves stumble directly into them, catching both Takuto and Two off guard. Takuto freezes in surprise, realizing the dark elves he planned to carefully avoid, those same elves he was prepared to flee from if they ever crossed paths, are now standing right in front of them. Both he and Two remain unsure about how the encounter will turn out, but recognizing the importance of staying calm in situations like this, they manage to maintain their composure. At the same time, the dark elves have no intention of harming anyone. They explain that they've recently been driven from the city they once called home and have desperately led their people into the forest to seek safety. And after a difficult journey, they've managed to set up a temporary shelter in this cursed land. However, with no food available, they're in a desperate situation, knowing their children will starve without supplies. Captain Nagi, leader of the Dark Elves, is currently exploring this bleak forest alongside his soldiers, increasingly worried their journey might have been completely futile since the area seems utterly lifeless. Several of Nagi's men start complaining bitterly, arguing it might have been better if they just stayed and died back in the city, rather than starving out here. They recall grim stories about the forest being cursed by a mysterious man, a place where neither life nor love can ever flourish. Nagi quickly warns them against losing hope, reminding his people that if they falter now, their children waiting anxiously back at camp won't have any chance at all. He firmly reminds them their kids still have faith in them, and that turning back empty-handed simply isn't an option. Still, as Nagi continues forward, he can't help but reflect on his soldiers' grim words. Deep down, he knows they're not wrong. The chances of survival here seem impossibly slim. But as their leader, he can't afford to show fear or give up because his people depend on him to guide them safely through this crisis. Walking deeper into the woods, Nagi suddenly senses the presence of Takuto and Two. A wave of dread rushes through him, afraid that these unknown entities might attack without mercy and wipe out his entire team. Whatever choice he makes next could determine the fate of his people, so Nagi steels himself, deciding to approach diplomatically. When Nagi finally reaches them, he's taken aback by Takuto's shadowy, spirit-like appearance, though the two seems relatively normal. Without hesitation, Nagi immediately drops to his knees, prompting his followers to do the same. Then, with a voice full of humility, he apologizes for entering their territory uninvited. Two, glaring coldly at Nagi, sharply questions him, demanding to know why he would trespass despite knowing it was forbidden. Nagi nervously explains their desperate circumstances, how their people were banished without warning, forced to flee their city without supplies, the exhausting journey, and the starving children still waiting anxiously in the forest. Feeling increasingly anxious under Two's harsh gaze, Nagi braces himself, convinced they're about to execute him. However, Takuto surprises him by calmly asking if he's hungry. Nagi hesitates nervously, uncertain how to respond until Two firmly instructs him to answer her master's question. Quietly, Nagi admits he is hungry, and immediately Takuto conjures several apples out of thin air. Nagi stares in bewilderment, never having seen an apple before, unsure if they're even edible. Takuto kindly assures him that the fruit is juicy and delicious, encouraging him to try it. Still hesitant, Nagi looks behind him, shocked to see his men already devouring the apples eagerly. Two then firmly urges him to eat as well, yet Nagi still feels uneasy. Noticing his hesitation, Takuto promptly conjures pears as well. Now Nagi is openly suspicious, deeply confused by Takuto's generosity. The Dark Elves had always been viewed with hostility, constantly rejected by others. To suddenly encounter someone willing to help without any hidden motive felt disturbingly unnatural. Nagi finally states he'd rather bring the food back to feed the starving children in their camp. But before he can even finish his sentence, Takuto conjures even more fruit for him. Overwhelmed, Nagi can only feel gratitude and disbelief. Meanwhile, back at the camp, the Dark Elf children lie weak and exhausted, silently praying for rescue. Suddenly, they catch a familiar scent in the air. Their prayers are answered because Nagi and his soldiers have returned, bringing with them more food than they've ever seen. Nagi joyfully tells everyone to prepare for a feast, and soon they're all eagerly eating, and the starving children quickly regain their strength. One of the elves then curiously asks Nagi where he got all the food, but Nagi avoids giving details. Instead, he simply tells them fate finally smiled upon them. Yet deep in his heart, he remains haunted by the memory of the mysterious, intimidating figure he encountered in the forest. After the meal, everyone falls into a peaceful sleep, except for Nagi, who remains awake, staring thoughtfully into the fire. As he stands watch, Elder Moltar approaches quietly, gently pulling Nagi out of his deep contemplation. Moltar expresses gratitude for Nagi's efforts but mentions that the fruit tasted unlike anything he's ever known even after living 200 years. Nagi nods, agreeing that the fruit definitely tasted strange. Moltar presses him about where the food came from, prompting Nagi to confess they encountered a legendary figure after wandering deep into the cursed forest. Hearing this, Moltar wonders aloud if it was perhaps the King of Ruin, recalling ancient stories about a mythical being said to appear when the world becomes too crowded, destroying everything and returning civilization to darkness. But no one knows if those legends hold any truth, since nobody's ever witnessed it personally. Moltar asks Nagi directly if the mysterious figure introduced himself as the King of Ruin. Nagi admits Takuto never actually introduced himself at all. He only spoke through his servant. Moltar insists there's no way a dark entity like that would offer assistance for free, demanding to know what Nagi promised in exchange. Nagi, however, insists it was purely an act of generosity from Takuto, nothing else. Moltar remains skeptical, arguing no evil being ever offers help without hidden motives. Nagi firmly calls Takuto the Great One, determined to defend him and emphasizing that he simply chose to help. Moltar counters that such a noble title doesn't suit the rumored King of Ruin, but Nagi refuses to budge. He argues passionately that Takuto deserves the respect because he helped them in their time of need, and frustratingly wonders if it might have been better if they all died rather than receive such aid. Hearing this, Moltar reluctantly concedes Nagi's point, agreeing to handle negotiations personally when the time comes to repay their mysterious benefactor. Nagi gazes over at his sleeping people, silently questioning when they might finally rest without fear. At the same time, Atu is thoroughly upset with Takuto for wasting valuable mana by feeding total strangers. She sternly forces him onto his knees as he tries to explain he simply felt sorry for them. Hedru can't believe his recklessness, reminding him sharply they don't yet know whether Minavra will be peaceful or brutal, or how many battles might lie ahead. So wasting mana like that could be dangerous. Realizing she might have gone too far scolding her own king, Atu quickly apologizes. But Takuto gently reassures her, reminding her they're partners and that he couldn't survive in this place without her by his side. He also admits feeling awkward around the Dark Elves, suggesting perhaps he's shy. Atu is surprised. She assumed Takuto was deliberately playing the role of a dignified king, communicating solely through her as his servant. The two laugh and tease each other playfully for a moment, until Takuto's summoned scout finally returns. The following morning, Nagi prepares himself for another visit to Takuto, and Elder Moltar asks if he's really prepared to meet the Dark King. Moltar strongly believes that since they've already accepted aid from the Dark King, they must also be prepared to pay whatever price he demands in return. Nagi objects, reminding him that Takuto never once suggested anything like that, but Moltar insists it's simply in the nature of evil beings to ask something in exchange for any act of kindness. Yet he agrees they need to rely on Takuto for now since nowhere else is safe. So they decide to visit Takuto together, completely unaware that his insect scout had been observing their entire conversation. Takuto quickly calls back the scout to report to him, and upon hearing that the elves are on their way, he quietly hopes they'll just pick up the remaining food he had prepared yesterday and leave without causing a fuss. Anxiety quickly starts to grip Takuto as he explains to Atu that he's terrible with conversations and doesn't know if he'll be able to negotiate properly with the Dark Elves. Atu reassures him she'll handle it herself, adding that this will also show the Dark Elves that her king wouldn't stoop low enough to speak with them personally. Shortly after, Moltar and Nagi arrive, and the Elder Moltar greets Takuto with an overly formal and eloquent salutation, almost like something straight out of cover letter, thanking him for the generous provision he offered his folk. Moltar then respectfully asks permission to know the identity of their Dark King. After receiving permission from Takuto, Atu reveals his name proudly, declaring him to be the feared Dark King of Ruin himself. Both of the Dark Elves become visibly shaken upon having their worst fears confirmed. Atu then coldly instructs them to simply take the food and leave because it's not going to last much longer anyway. Yet Moltar politely insists on repaying Takuto for his generosity and asks what they can possibly give him in return. Atu coldly informs him that there's nothing in their possession capable of pleasing her king, so attempting repayment would be pointless. She then questions if the elves even have anything left that they consider valuable at all, causing Moltar to hesitate as he realizes they genuinely have nothing worthwhile to give. Noticing his hesitation, Atu immediately gives him a cold, intimidating stare and suspiciously asks him if he's secretly planning something. Moltar becomes visibly flustered, and Takuto quickly realizes their conversation is going downhill fast, so he immediately signals Atu over to quietly discuss how they should proceed, But Atu becomes frustrated because she thinks Takuto is being way too soft on these two hopeless elves. And she insists these guys have zero clue how to handle negotiations, and if this continues, they'll just turn into an annoying headache later on. So she dramatically suggests killing them both and displaying their heads around the base as a clear warning, but Takuto quickly tells her to stop acting like a psycho. He calmly explains that the elves genuinely seem to want peaceful coexistence and sincerely wish to repay their kindness. Instead of just handing out freebies, he suggests they ask for something small in return, keeping their relations with the elves positive. Atu reluctantly agrees and then tells the elves that her king has generously decided to accept their offer of repayment. Seeing Molter suddenly relax makes Takuto and Atu both realize he was freaking out earlier because he had totally assumed Takuto would act like a typical villain. Atu scolds Molter for misjudging her king so harshly, but then she pauses, realizing she doesn't actually know what to ask them for. Thankfully, Takuto quickly comes up with a great idea and suggests that they ask the elves to provide them with information about the world outside this forest. Molter immediately lights up with relief, promising eagerly that he'll share every bit of knowledge he's gained about the outside world. Atu nods but adds sternly that once Molter has provided the information, he and his tribe must leave the forest immediately. This shocks Nagi and Molter deeply, and they quickly plead to be allowed to continue living there under Takuto's protection, but Atu snaps at them to quit pushing their luck if they value their lives. Nagi tries to argue further, but Molter quickly silences him, admitting they must respect the king's wishes. They begin turning to leave, but watching them, Takuto suddenly feels a pang of guilt for kicking them out like this. He abruptly changes his mind, telling Molter and Nagi that instead of leaving, they can become citizens of his kingdom. Both elves freeze up completely, stunned by this unexpected kindness, though no one is more shocked than Atu, who can't believe what she's hearing. She immediately questions Takuto's logic, asking what the hell he's thinking. He calmly reminds her about the refugee system from the game, allowing different races to peacefully join their nation. And since dark elves are neutral aligned, he points out they'll easily blend in with their kingdom's evil attribute, making coexistence entirely possible. Atu still isn't totally convinced because evil-aligned species usually end up causing drama among themselves. But Takuto gently refreshes her memory that their main citizens, named homunculi, literally look like humans who got shredded and put back together by a 5-year-old, and there's no way they're going to be hanging out with those creepy things all day. The horrifying image of the homunculi immediately pops into Atu's mind, instantly changing her mind. She quickly agrees and turns to Molter and Nagi, declaring that Takuto plans to build a full-fledged kingdom soon and is generously offering them citizenship if they're willing to swear loyalty. Molter hesitates, asking what exactly it means to become their citizens, and Atu bluntly answers that they basically become evil-aligned beings. Still, she assures them with a sly smile that being evil isn't nearly as bad as it sounds. It's actually a lot more fun. Not long after, Takuto and Atu visit the Dark Elves' settlement, where everyone anxiously awaits their arrival. They're so terrified that some of the weaker elves pass out at just the sight of Takuto. Calmly, Takuto takes his place on the throne with Atu at his side, who announces clearly to everyone gathered that from now on, they officially belong to their new kingdom, Managra. She then asks Takuto if he's certain, and with a confident he says yeah, and then confirms that on his screen. And just like that, the Dark Elves are officially citizens of Managra. Atu congratulates them, emphasizing that from now onward their safety and survival are personally guaranteed by their new king. Nagi wonders out loud if that's really it, because he doesn't actually feel any different despite supposedly becoming an evil being. Almost immediately, he regrets speaking too soon when a wave of overwhelming hatred suddenly floods through him and the rest of the elves. Painful memories of being persecuted and attacked surge in their minds, filling them with an intense desire for revenge. Seeing everyone suddenly suffering, Takuto softly asks if they're alright, and hearing his genuine concern, Nagi becomes emotional and deeply moved by the realization that someone finally cares about them. With tears streaming down their faces, the Dark Elves start passionately cheering for Takuto, leaving him a little overwhelmed but deeply touched by their enthusiasm. After a few days, Molter presents a map of the continent to Takuto, who immediately collapses in disbelief. Atu asks what's troubling him, and he simply gestures towards the map, saying their starting location couldn't be any freaking worse. They're stuck on a continent shared by two damn gigantic, powerful civilizations. On one side is the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, a massive human nation worshipping Arlos, a creator and known for being annoyingly righteous and strictly good-aligned. On the opposite side lies Elna, the Elemental Alliance, a nation of elves devoted to nature. They're equally on the side of good, making Atu realize they're literally sandwiched between two huge civilizations that would wipe them out in an instant if discovered. Panicking, Atu falls beside Takuto in despair. But Takuto quickly regains composure, reminding her that as long as they keep a low profile, they can quietly grow stronger. He recalls that their main race, the homunculi, were dumb as rocks in the game and terrible at research. Luckily, now that they've got dark elves on their side, things should go much smoother. Soon after, the dark elves arrive for a meeting, this time bringing along Emil, Nagi's assistant. Nagi introduces her as a nerdy genius who knows way more than him about foreign kingdoms, and insists she'll definitely prove useful. Atu conveys to the elves that their dedication has pleased the king, and she announces they're all about to receive major responsibilities directly ordered by Takuto himself. First up, Molter is tasked with managing internal affairs. Atu says she expects big things from him, especially since she learned he knows magic too. Next, she appoints Nagi as the head of Minara's warriors, charging him with building a powerful military for defense. When she leads recruitment up to him, Nagi is way too excited, shouting dramatically that he'll destroy all their enemies and proudly mount their heads as trophies. But Takuto's already feeling queasy at the gruesome imagery. He quietly remarks that war is barbaric, and Atu clarifies for the confused Nagi that their king actually prefers peace, so he needs to chill out with the killing talk. This just confuses Nagi even more, who wonders what kind of dark king of ruin is into peace. Molter, seeing Nagi's confusion, sarcastically teases him and confidently states that unlike Nagi, who clearly has more muscles than brains, he himself will prove far more useful to Takuto. Nagi immediately takes it as a challenge, boasting loudly to Takuto that he's young and full of energy, ready to tirelessly serve the king without rest. Atu completely misunderstands their little competition as genuine dedication, staking them for workaholics instead of two idiots desperate for Big Eel Daddy's approval. She turns to Takuto, asking if they should send them on a resource-collecting mission, but Takuto suggests a better idea, beautifying the land and building proper homes. Atu immediately relays this to Moltar, instructing him to gather timber for building, but to make sure he doesn't ruin the beauty of the forest. Molter eagerly agrees, boasting that dark elves were originally forest dwellers anyway, so he'll handle it perfectly. Takuto then adds that they should reforest the areas they clear, causing confusion among the elves who've never even heard the term before. Realizing this world might be more primitive than expected, Takuto cautiously asks if they're familiar with military magic or the 6 major elements. Molter replies that he's only heard of 4 major elements, while Emil admits she's never even seen military magic being used by any kingdom. Takuto and Atu exchange looks, realizing they've hit a jackpot. This world is even less advanced than they thought, giving them a huge advantage to leap ahead quickly once they implement advanced magical technology. Atu patiently explains that reforesting means rapidly regrowing new trees to replace ones they've cut down using magic. The elves mention they do regrow trees naturally, but admit they never considered using magic to speed things up. Atu describes how reforesting employs the 6 major elements to rapidly grow new trees, then promptly credits this discovery to Takuto, even though it's a total lie. She starts glazing Takuto shamelessly, bragging about how he even created those special fruits the elves ate earlier, especially mentioning that grapes are her personal favorite. Emil excitedly confirms Atu's words, then says that she also planted some grape seeds and they've actually started sprouting. Takuto himself is stunned by this revelation, not expecting earth-based fruits to grow so easily here. Suddenly inspired, he quickly tests his theory by magically creating a coin from earth. When it works, he's thrilled to realize he could potentially introduce advanced technologies like gunpowder, drastically accelerating the growth and superiority of his civilization compared to others. At the same time, over in the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, things were also beginning to heat up. St. Solina marched ahead of a squad of knights through snow-blanketed foothills, determined to wipe out some vicious creatures menacing the surrounding villages. The moment a pack of goblins rushed into view, Solina calmly raised her staff, incinerating them instantly with her sacred fire. The holy blaze dissipated into the sky after obliterating the monsters, and gentle sunlight poured down onto the charred earth, prompting flowers to bloom in their place. Turning to its astonished knights, their captain proudly announced that Solina's divine power purged monsters of evil alignment, leaving behind blossoming flower fields, and it was her ability alone that had allowed them to maintain such strong diplomatic ties with the elves. Following the brief skirmish, Solina confronted the cardinal, urging him to send paladins southward, warning that she'd recently sensed an ominous disturbance within the cursed forest. But the cardinal flatly refused, claiming the cursed forest sat at the far edge of the continent and deploying paladins that would require special authorization from those above him. Unfazed, Solina firmly warned him that she would personally handle the matter if no troops were sent. Initially, the cardinal tried pushing back but quickly caved under her icy glare, promising instead to send whatever limited forces he could personally command. Meanwhile, back in their own domain, Takuto and Atu were focused on developing their newfound territory, beginning by constructing decent homes for the Dark Elves. They'd already thrown together a makeshift throne room around Takuto's throne, and he was thrilled by the idea of finally hosting important meetings with the prominent members of his kingdom. Right then, Molter, Nagi, and Emil entered ready for action. Atu informed them that it was about damn time to kick off their first official council meeting. But before the meeting could start, Emil eagerly approached Takuto, revealing a gift, an elegant new outfit that, to his mild embarrassment, was dangerously close to femboy territory. Still, Takuto gratefully accepted the new clothes, admitting his old garments were getting embarrassingly filthy, and thanked the elves sincerely. Oddly enough, the elves couldn't see any visible change in his appearance, but they decided to trust Atu's enthusiastic praise about how perfectly the outfit suited their beloved leader. With the clothing crisis resolved, Atu briskly began the council meeting, only to realize Takuto was still hopelessly lost and admiring himself. Slightly annoyed but unsurprised, she chose to carry on the meeting herself, casually suggesting she consult Takuto whenever his actual input was needed, and Takuto happily agreed to her suggestion, fully content to keep silently fawning over his own fabulousness. As the meeting begins, Molter immediately asks Atu about the type of buildings they ought to prioritize. So Atu confidently suggests they start with food production facilities and promptly reveals a disturbingly grotesque plan, announcing that it will serve as their primary food source for now. The elves visibly cringed, barely able to hide their disgust, before hesitantly asking Atu what the hell that horrific thing was supposed to be. With unsettling enthusiasm, she informed them it was called the flesh plant, a unique delicacy of their civilization. According to Atu, it produced meat that tasted disturbingly similar to human flesh, and was incredibly nutritious. Horrified by this revelation, the elves quickly clarified they weren't exactly into eating people. Atu assured them the flesh plant was just a temporary solution for their food shortage, and soon enough they'd have far less disturbing options available. After that unsettling announcement, she explained they'd also need storage units and administrative buildings near the farms, till Emil promptly volunteered to oversee those structures. Next, Atu shifted gears to the next crucial topic on the agenda: research. She emphasized that obtaining cutting-edge tech was absolutely critical for a fledgling nation like theirs. Molter, intrigued, asked her specifically what sort of technology they should focus on, and Atu excitedly revealed their target would be magical tech. Takuto practically lit up with excitement upon hearing that, and Molter eagerly declared that as a skilled mage, he put in his best effort to impress their king. He followed up, asking precisely what kind of magical tech they should aim for, and Atu enthusiastically revealed they'd dive straight into military magic research. She explained that standard attack spells were pitifully limited, barely managing to handle a handful of enemies, while advanced military-grade magic could annihilate entire cities or even reshape terrain to their advantage. Molter, now fired up, immediately agreed to round up all magically gifted elves and begin working on groundbreaking magical spells that hadn't even appeared yet in their world. Then Atu moved on to the final topic of the meeting, their military strategy. Nagi perked up instantly, excited that it was finally his turn to shine. But Takuto quickly burst his bubble by bluntly stating they wouldn't heavily invest in their military right now. Atu backed him up, pointing out armies cost a shitload to maintain but produce nothing useful during peaceful periods. Nagi protested strongly, arguing they lacked sufficient power to properly defend their king, and thus should definitely prioritize their military. Molter also joined in, reminding them that both he and Nagi had massive bounties placed on their heads as Dark Elf leaders, meaning their kingdom might soon become a juicy target for enemies. Understanding their concerns, Takuto quickly came up with a smarter alternative, creating a hero to defend the kingdom. Atu immediately agreed, admitting heroes were expensive upfront but required zero upkeep, making them the perfect choice given their current situation. The elves stared blankly, clearly having zero clue what the hell a hero was even supposed to be. Atu quickly clarified that heroes were ridiculously powerful beings who served directly under the king. She explained that each hero had certain conditions that needed to be met before summoning them, but she confidently reassured them they'd be able to summon their first hero fairly soon. Takuto, pumped as ever, was already hyped up at the idea. He remembered that nearly everything in this world required mana, and a kingdom could only gather that mana directly from its own people. The happier the citizens were, the more mana they produce, and Takuto made a silent vow right there. He'd turn this kingdom into the happiest damn place on the entire planet. At the same time, far away in the holy kingdom of Qualia, a junior paladin named Lornias had just gotten the dubious honor of being selected for an investigation team heading straight into the notorious Cursed Forest. Accompanying him was a veteran paladin named Wordle, whose favorite pastime was clearly making Lornias' life a living hell with his constant teasing. Wordle immediately started bitching about the tiny size of their investigation unit, consisting of only 2 paladins and a handful of mercenaries. He grumbled loudly about how the church should seriously start taking Saint Solina's prophecies more seriously. Lornias cautiously agreed, though he was painfully aware nobody could predict what the higher-ups had planned. One thing he did know, though, was that if they managed to pull off this investigation, it'd receive huge rewards, but if things went south, his head would definitely be the first on the chopping block. Back in Minalra, Takuto strolled through the developing kingdom, inspecting the early stages of his civilization with a deep sense of nostalgia. It was a scene he witnessed thousands of times before, but always through a screen, never in person. This time, he was right in the thick of things. Enmol eagerly gave him a detailed tour, proudly explaining that dark elves excelled at constructing treehouses, although right now the housing project was crawling along since the elves had prioritized cultivating the flesh trees. Fortunately, the grotesque flesh trees seemed to be thriving nicely, and they'd already managed to build storage and administrative facilities. Enmol also mentioned that they discovered a freshwater spring close by and were now trying to find ways to draw water from it. Meanwhile, Molter and a bunch of other mages had been grinding hard on their magic research in a recently completed lab. Hearing all this progress made Takuto feel genuinely relieved, but he was particularly delighted to hear that the elves were proactively handling things like seeking out water sources on their own. Seeing the elves, who had looked utterly drained when they first arrived, now smiling happily was a huge relief. When Takuto shared his joy with Enmol, she suddenly burst into tears of happiness, completely startling him. Takuto panicked momentarily at the unexpected meltdown, but thankfully Enmol quickly regained her composure and continued the tour as if nothing had happened. Next, Enmol guided Takuto and Atu toward the flesh tree farm. With noticeable excitement, she explained that thanks to the tools Takuto had generously provided, they'd soon be able to enjoy their very first harvest. After that, Enmol guided them toward the freshwater spring the elves had discovered earlier, but immediately noticed the vibe was totally different this time around. Instead of clear, sparkling water, it had turned murky and dark, leaving Enmol visibly crushed, assuming it had become unusable. Before Atu could even explain why that wasn't the case, Molter and Nagi also arrived to check out the water. Both of them quickly agreed with Enmol, believing the spring had been ruined, but Atu just casually scooped up some of the gloomy-looking liquid and took a long sip, assuring everyone that it was perfectly safe. Atu then clarified that the spring only looked creepy and unsettling because it had officially become part of Minalra, all thanks to a neat little feature known as cursed terrain. Takuto chimed in, gently telling the elves to take a deep breath. As soon as they inhaled the gloomy air, they were instantly energized, their minds clearer, and their bodies revitalized. Atu happily explained that cursed terrain grants bonuses to any creatures aligned with evil, while severely messing up anyone with neutral or good alignment. Since the Dark Elves were now officially part of Minalra and therefore had evil alignment, the water posed no threat whatsoever. Nagi cautiously took a sip himself, confirming her words. Atu added that soon enough the entire forest would transform into this sinister-looking cursed terrain. Regardless, Takuto immediately started worrying aloud, pointing out that cursed terrain stuck out like a sore thumb. Molter nodded gravely, agreeing that once the entire forest turned this ominous shade of creepy, they'd become easy targets for their enemies. Naturally, Nagi jumped at the chance to once again insist they desperately needed an army, but both Takuto and Atu reassured him again that their solution was to summon a hero. Molter, still clueless about what exactly a hero was, pressed for more explanation. Atu decided that a hands-on demonstration would be far more effective than another lecture. Without warning, Atu released a bunch of pitch-black tentacles from her back, effortlessly slicing through the nearby trees like they were toothpicks, before revealing smugly that she herself was a hero. She casually mentioned that she only had about 1% of her full power available, yet she could still obliterate entire armies on her own. Takuto eagerly hyped heroes up even more to the stunned elves, bragging that heroes were truly badass, continuously growing stronger with no effort at all. Realizing he'd gotten a bit carried away, he quickly shifted the conversation and scolded Atu lightly, telling her that showing off didn't require chopping down innocent trees and insisting she clean up the mess afterward. The elves, however, were beyond impressed. They immediately declared Takuto an amazing ruler for having subordinates powerful enough to cause such casual devastation. Fired up, they decided that they absolutely had to construct a magnificent palace worthy of such a king. Takuto awkwardly protested that he didn't really need anything grand right now, but the elves refused to budge, insisting there was no way in hell they'd let their esteemed king live in ordinary homes like theirs. Atu sided with the elves, pointing out that constructing a palace would boost everyone's morale. Unable to argue with that logic, Takuto relented, admitting that while his real dream was a badass flying fortress someday, he'd settle for a regular palace for now. Meanwhile, the investigation squad led by Lornias and Wardell has finally started heading south towards the cursed forests. Wardell still isn't happy about how small their party is, and Lornias reminds him this is literally the best the Empire could do, considering most of their forces are busy dealing with chaos up north. Apparently, a horde of evil-aligned creatures recently popped out of nowhere in the northern territories, raiding and torching entire towns, so naturally all available manpower got shipped off to handle that nightmare. Hearing this, the mercenaries start chatting amongst themselves, muttering how rough it's going to be for the poor bastards sent north. They all feel relieved they dodged that assignment even if the pay was sweet, because word is, there's a terrifying witch mixed up in that mess, and they'd rather steer clear of anything involving a witch. Lornia's curious about this witch rumor, later corners one of the mercenaries, a guy named Bargo, to ask about it. Bargo admits the rumor is that a single witch is behind all the northern chaos, but Lornias dismisses the idea outright, saying no single person could possibly control that many monsters. Bargo quickly agrees, figuring it must actually be some sort of cult activity, but then Wardell chimes in, telling Bargo to shut his mouth before he accidentally curses them all. Lornias then snaps at Wardell, noticing that the guy's been drinking on the job again. He starts lecturing him about how, as paladins serving their god, they're not even allowed to touch alcohol. But Wardell dismisses his scolding casually, even challenging him to a theological debate before abruptly losing interest when a waitress brings him another round of drinks, which prompts him to flirt shamelessly instead. Wargo then turns back to Lornias, seriously asking why the Empire sent 2 paladins this far south. He starts worrying again about the possibility of another witch being involved, openly admitting that if that's the case, he and his men might pack up and bounce before things go south. Lornias honestly replies he doesn't know the details either, but just then Wardell butts back in, casually mentioning he's already gathered some intel from his new waitress friend. Apparently, a bunch of dark elves recently fled into the cursed forests, and the higher-ups likely just want someone to keep an eye on them. Hearing this, Barvo instantly relaxes, saying they'd better deal with the dark elves quickly. After all, those bastards are notorious for their nasty curses and stealthy assassinations. Lornias completely agrees, saying that ignoring the dark elves now will only lead to bigger trouble down the line. But Wardell immediately tells him to calm down and take it easy, reminding him this mission is strictly recon. If things even hint at getting messy, they're packing up and running the hell out. But Lornia is always a stickler about vanquishing evil wherever it shows up, stubbornly insists that as paladins, retreating from danger isn't an option. Wardell scolds Lornias, telling him to stop chasing glory and only fight when it's absolutely necessary instead of jumping into danger every chance he gets. He reminds Lornias that he's got family waiting at home, and so does everyone else on this mission, so they need to think twice before risking their lives. Meanwhile, back in Minagra, the first harvest from the flesh trees is finally ready, standing atop a massive altar at the center of town. Takuto stands in front of the fruit pile as all the dark elves watch him intently, eager to see what's about to go down. Suddenly, Takuto channels his mana directly into the fruits, and right before everyone's eyes, they transform into a giant bug monster. The elves are utterly blown away, amazed that Takuto just created life from a bunch of weird fruits. Atu immediately starts hyping him up, boasting that this miracle isn't even 1% of Takuto's true power. She tells the elves that with their ongoing devotion, Takuto will become even stronger and pull off even crazier feats, and they erupt in cheers for their king. Later on, Takuto returns to his throne, relieved that he successfully managed to produce a bug monster in exchange for food. Though it was a standard feature in the original game, he still doesn't fully grasp how exactly this mechanic works out in the real world. However, Atu tells him they shouldn't sweat the details since they've now established a reliable method to produce more creatures to serve the kingdom. She excitedly adds that it's about time they moved on to the next phase of their plan, and Takuto agrees, mentioning he'll summon a hero as soon as they've stockpiled enough mana. Excited, Atu asks who he plans to summon, and Takuto casually replies that he's thinking about calling Isla, Queen of the Bugs. Atu nods, saying that's definitely a solid choice, while Takuto enthusiastically starts explaining Isla's perks. She can buff all insect-type monsters, allowing them to dominate on the front lines, and she can also produce larvae to handle mundane tasks, providing essential support to the kingdom on multiple fronts. Atu appreciates that he clearly put serious thought into this choice, and Takuto sheepishly admits that Isla was honestly the only safe option available, since the other potential heroes are completely unhinged. Atu wholeheartedly agrees, joking that the other heroes would require years of intensive therapy. Takuto chuckles in response, acknowledging he hopes to summon them eventually, but definitely not anytime soon. Meanwhile, Lornias and the group finally arrive at the Dark Continent, quickly running into their first major threat, and it's a towering hill giant. Lornias immediately tries to command the mercenaries into a defensive formation, but Wardell cuts him off, telling them all to chill because he'll handle this big guy himself. He bluntly adds that they don't have time to waste, and it'll be faster if everyone just stays out of his way. The rest of the group watches in awe as Wordle calmly walks toward the hill giant with his sword drawn, completely unfazed by its monstrous size. Wordle channels holy energy into his blade while the giant, oddly polite, waits patiently until he's done. When the giant finally swings his massive club, Wordle casually blocks the blow and slices right through it like it's made of cardboard. Not missing a beat, he launches himself at the stunned monster, delivering a whirlwind of rapid slashes before the giant even has a chance to process what's happening. With the giant crashing down lifelessly, Wordle casually strolls back to his teammates like he just finished a casual morning workout. Lornias is absolutely hyped, immediately praising Wordle and confidently declaring that their mission is practically in the bag now that they've got him. But Wordle's serious expression quickly sobers everyone up, making Lornias uneasy with his skepticism. Meanwhile, back in Minara, Takuto is happily munching down on a burger when it too gently nags him to eat something healthier. Takuto playfully protests, reminding her that he spent way too long in the hospital surviving on boring, flavorless health food. So now he's determined to explore all the tasty junk food life has to offer. He then gets a little worried when he realizes Atu herself has been surviving exclusively on salads for days, but she reassures him that this diet suits her just fine. They chat for a while about how quickly construction has progressed lately, when Takuto suddenly remembers something important. He asks Atu to call Moltar and the others once they're finished eating, since the new scout bugs they recently created have completed mapping the nearby areas. He reveals that he's planning to deal with a human settlement they discovered nearby, asking Atu first to confirm if the town belongs to the Holy Kingdom of Qualia. She's fairly confident the settlement is independent and aligned neutrally, which is a huge relief for Takuto, since it means negotiation might actually be possible. Takuto optimistically hopes nothing disastrous occurs during their interaction, and Atu jokes that he's definitely jinxing them by even mentioning it. Takuto laughs confidently, assuring her nothing crazy like that could happen. But of course, at that very moment, he receives an urgent message from one of the bugs. An armed group is heading directly toward their forest. Takuto instantly grows serious, instructing Atu that they should try resolving things peacefully if possible, but if push comes to shove, it better be prepared to throw down. At the same time, the armed group making their way into the forest is none other than Lornia's and Wordle's crew. As they push deeper, Wordle suddenly raises a hand, signaling everyone to stop because he sensed someone's presence approaching them. Sure enough, Atu emerges from the trees wearing dark clothes that completely conceal her identity. Wordle immediately demands she identify herself, and Atu calmly claims she's a dark elf who's found refuge here alongside her people because there's nowhere else safe for them to go. Wordle acknowledges her situation but bluntly tells her to step aside because their group has orders to investigate this forest. Atu firmly responds that they shouldn't go any further, causing Wordle's instincts to flare up, sensing something shady going on. But before he can say more, Lornias rudely jumps into the conversation, yelling at Atu and demanding how she dares disobey a servant of God. Wordle sharply snaps at him, telling him to shut his mouth and stop interrupting. Lornias is visibly frustrated at being rebuked over such a trivial issue, but Wordle swiftly resumes his conversation with Atu, explaining they cannot turn back simply because she asked them to, then pointedly asks if there's something she's trying to hide within the forest. She insists there's nothing here but elves who simply wish to live peacefully and questions why he's so hell-bent on invading this godforsaken forest. After a moment of hesitation, Wordle sighs and finally reveals their reason. The Saintess recently had a vision of an immense evil hiding here, and thus he cannot return until he verifies this personally. The mercenaries gasp in shock, having been kept in the dark about such a critical detail. Lornias immediately starts flipping out, demanding to know how Wordle could casually spill classified information like it's some local gossip. Wordle snaps back at him again, shouting that sometimes secrets must be shared openly. But Lornias, furious and flustered, angrily retorts that even a high-ranking paladin like Wordle doesn't have the authority to reveal divine prophecies without permission from their superiors. However, Wordle politely asks Atu if they can at least take a quick look inside the forest, but suddenly her attitude completely shifts as she bluntly tells them there's absolutely nothing inside that's worth their precious time. She firmly urges them to turn back immediately, but Lornias grows furious at the sheer audacity of a dark elf daring to defy a divine prophecy. He senses the air around Atu shifting ominously, confirming his suspicions that something deeply sinister lurks within the woods that they must investigate no matter what. However, Wordle appears open to negotiation. Trying to de-escalate the tension, he calmly asks Atu to swear on her own god that no threat to the Holy Kingdom of Qualia is hiding in the forest. Atu readily takes the oath, even swearing by her deity, and it's actually they who fear Qualia far more than Qualia could ever fear them. Satisfied by this, Wordle announces they're retreating, much to Lornias' complete disbelief. Lornias immediately protests, insisting it's blatantly obvious that the woman is hiding something crucial. But Wordle just snaps at him, calling Lornias a faithless coward and telling him to stop projecting his own paranoia onto others. He declares that they found absolutely nothing of concern, officially ending their investigation. With that, Wordle begins walking away confidently, but Lornias has finally reached his boiling point. Refusing to let Wordle make another reckless decision, he sternly informs Wordle that he's officially revoking his authority as a High Paladin for casually spilling a divine prophecy to an enemy and abandoning his sacred duties. He swiftly orders the mercenaries to follow him deeper into the forest to uncover the evil hidden within. Bargo quickly agrees, mostly because Lornias is the guy signing their paychecks, and there's no arguing with money. Atu desperately pleads with them one final time to stop, but Lornias coldly ignores her and commands his men to capture her immediately, even as Wordle shouts at him not to escalate the situation further. Atu lets out a weary sigh, sadly acknowledging that peaceful negotiations have collapsed into utter failure. Seconds later, the mercenaries suddenly find themselves skewered on Atu's spikes, transformed into human kebabs before they can even blink. Lornias himself was knocked out, and when he woke, he never even comprehended what hit him. And the only one who did see everything and is still alive is Wordle, and he shouts at Lornias that they're dealing with an actual freaking witch. Atu then calmly sheds her disguise, remarking regretfully how unfortunate it was that peaceful talks had to end so violently. Turns out more of those bastards are still alive, and Wordle immediately yells for someone to report this freaking mess to the kingdom. But Bargo shuts that down real quick because every last messenger they had already got their asses impaled by Atu. And the surviving mercenaries aren't even close to fast enough to make the trip in time, especially not with Atu currently in full-on impaling asses mode. With zero options left, Wordle tells everyone to grab their damn weapons because now they've got no choice but to fight. He commands the mercenaries to unload everything they've got, so they fire a volley of arrows, but Atu effortlessly deflects them all like she's brushing lint off her coat. Wordle curses his luck, knowing full well that the absolute last person he wanted to go up against was Atu, and funny enough, she's just as annoying to be dealing with him. She makes it painfully clear this entire situation is Lornias' fault because if they had just agreed to leave the forest alone, she would have let them walk away. But no, Lornias had to get all noble and damn self-righteous, and now she's got no choice but to kill him. Lornias finally realizes he screwed up royally and turns to Wordle, asking if he even knows what the hell this freaking thing really is. Wordle admits he suspected something was off from the moment they first saw her, which is exactly why he wanted to leave without throwing hands. But now that he's seen her true form up close, he's certain Atu is a witch, but not the storybook kind either. Because a witch in this world is a certified Calamity-class monster, officially recognized as a national-level threat. Someone like her is way out of the mercenaries' league, so Wordle orders them to fall back and leave this to him and Lornias. Both men charge Atu, reciting their sacred prayers to power up their attacks. Atu doesn't take them seriously at first, just blocks their strikes and mocks them for being so weak. But then they actually manage to slice through two of her tentacles, and suddenly she realizes this might not be the cakewalk she thought. She quickly figures out their holy magic is giving them bonus damage against her demonic body, and Wordle assumes that if they just cut off all her tentacles, she'll be helpless. Not wanting that to happen, Atu grabs two of the nearby mercenaries and takes them hostage, using their bodies as meat shields to stall their assault. But Wordle coldly tells Lornias that if they don't stop Atu now, she could eventually turn her wrath toward Quolia, and for the sake of the entire nation, sacrifices have to be made. Lornias hates the idea, but he grits his teeth and agrees. With zero hesitation, both men charge forward again, slicing through the hostages and Atu's final two tentacles in one clean, ruthless strike. Atu's honestly surprised they had the balls to slice through their own allies like that. And for a brief moment, it even looks like she might actually be in trouble. But no, because this whole thing has just been a damn joke to her. 1 second later, a fresh wave of tentacles erupts from the ground like weeds on steroids, and Wordle is instantly skewered multiple times like a pincushion. With blood pouring from his wounds, Wordle uses his final breath to shout for Lornias to get the hell out of here. But that makes Atu annoyed, so she silences him for good with a tentacle straight through the skull. Lornias is frozen in disbelief, absolutely rattled, because he was certain that chopped off all of Atu's tentacles, which they did, but Atu never once said she couldn't grow more. In fact, she's been able to summon an unlimited number this entire time, but she just didn't feel like it. She's been toying with them like a bored cat swatting at bugs. After witnessing Wordle get brutally annihilated, the remaining mercenaries completely lose their will to fight. And judging by the freaking look on Atu's face, she has zero intention of sparing any of them. Seeing no other choice, Lornias yells for everyone to scatter and run in different directions, hoping at least one of them can escape and warn the kingdom about what really went down here. So the mercenaries immediately drop their weapons and bolt like their asses are on fire. Atu surprisingly doesn't bother chasing them. She just watches them go, sighing in annoyance, wishing they'd done that in the first place because it would have saved her a ton of effort. Lornias, however, stays behind, determined to keep her occupied. He then charges her with everything he's got, holy sword gleaming. But to his utter horror, Atu blocks the strike flawlessly, using the exact same holy sword technique. He stumbles back, unable to comprehend how a monstrous creature like her could possibly have access to a sacred technique meant only for the pure. Normally, that would have been impossible, but Atu coolly explains that when she killed Wordle, she absorbed all of his experience and sword skills. Every ounce of training, every technique, now hers. With a grin, she begins attacking Lornias using Wordle's own moves, mocking him as she does. She even praises Wordle, saying he was truly worthy of being called elite, but sadly he died because Lornias couldn't keep his damn mouth shut. Then she leans in, taunting him, asking if he ever thought about making it home to his wife and daughter. That's when the blood drains from Lornias' face because he never said a word about his family. That's when it hits him. She can just take Wordle's skills, she took his damn memories too, and if Atu can do that, then every kill just makes her even more terrifying. She then casually asks Lornias if he's curious about Wordle's final thoughts before she finished him off. Turns out, unlike a selfish bastard like Lornias, Wordle was genuinely concerned for the lives of his men right up until his last breath. Lornias desperately tries defending himself, saying the other mercenaries have already fled to report back to the kingdom, claiming their mission wasn't a complete disaster. But Atu just chuckles coldly, calmly telling him all those mercenaries are already dead. She admits she wasn't in the mood to chase them herself, but that didn't mean she'd just let them run off. Besides, she never said she was alone. She already ordered her dark elves to hunt down every single merc who tried to escape, and now they're nothing but corpses in the dirt. Lornias is hit by a wave of despair, realizing he's the last one standing. Driven by panic, he takes one final pathetic swing at Atu's head, and she savors every bit of his agony. Within seconds, she's effortlessly subdued him. But instead of ending him right away, Atu cruelly twists the knife, vividly describing how things could have turned out if he'd just listened to Wordle. They would have all safely returned home, and Lornias would have seen his wife and daughter again, spending the rest of his life happily oblivious to any horrors lurking in the forest. But no, Lornias had to play hero. So now she's going to kill him, and then she's got to hunt down his family too, just because she can. Atu reveals she can easily pluck the image of his wife and daughter right from his memories, names, faces, address, everything, and she's absolutely petty enough to follow through. Hell, she might even slaughter every single person living in the villages Lornias passed on his way here. And while each of them is dying the most painful death imaginable, she'll make damn sure they know it was Paladin and Lornias who brought hell down on them. Lornias screams, desperately begging her not to do it, but Atu's already bored of his whining, finally putting an end to him just to shut him up. Right after Lornias hits the ground, Nagi comes up to inform Atu that all the escaping mercenaries have been dealt with, so there won't be any survivors to spread word of today's events. Atu calmly thanks Nagi for his efficiency and instructs him to handle disposing of the corpses too. But before Atu can leave, Nagi hesitantly asks if she's serious about her plan to slaughter Lornias' family and anyone he's ever crossed paths with. Atu just laughs, saying she was just talking smack to scare the hell out of Lornias before finishing him off. She clarifies that mass genocide is way too exhausting, and besides, she's a self-proclaimed peace lover. So starting pointless fights is just too exhausting for her tastes, and she's not about that life unless someone forces her hand. With that out of the way, she cuts the chat short because she urgently needs to talk to Kudo. Moments later, Atu approaches Takuto and shares something odd she noticed before the fight. Wordle called her a witch despite her clearly being classified as a hero. He also rambled something about a witch causing trouble up north. Takuto is confused because there was never any witch class in the game they came from, prompting Atu to suggest that this world must differ significantly from the one they're familiar with. Takuto nods thoughtfully, having already suspected that. While many of the game's mechanics remain intact, they're better off assuming the underlying rules have fundamentally changed. Luckily, the differences aren't entirely negative because Atu's ability to absorb skills from those she kills has gotten a massive upgrade. Now she also inherits fragments of their memories which allow them to gather valuable intel from Quelia's scouting team. And according to those memories, Quelia is currently distracted by the northern disturbance, meaning Minara won't be on their radar anytime soon. Still, the complete annihilation of their scouting party is bound to raise some red flags, prompting Quelia to eventually investigate. Takuto's fully aware of that risk, but since Quelia knows nothing concrete about Minara yet, he's confident they won't jump straight into a fight unless their leaders have the IQ on potato. At the moment, he's far more concerned about this northern disturbance and the mysterious witch behind it. Atu tried extracting every detail about witches from Wordle's mind, but the guy was clueless. However, one chilling fact stood out crystal clear. The witch called Arakino is wreaking havoc up north, and she was strong enough to single-handedly deal massive damage to Quelle's forces. At the same time up in the Northern Territory, Arakino's casually finished demolishing yet another village and is already prepping to move on to the next. To top it off, she raises every villager she slaughtered as undead puppets to serve her. Takuto has absolutely no clue about Arakino's true powers, but given that she's causing this much mayhem so soon after arriving, he suspects she might have come from another world, just like him and Atu. If that's the case, things are about to get a whole lot messier. Atu, unsure of their next move, asks Takuto what they should do. Judging by the sheer carnage Arakino's caused, she's clearly evil-aligned, which theoretically means they might vibe with her. Atu wonders if maybe they should reach out and see if they can form some kind of alliance, but Takuto immediately shoots that idea down because they have zero intel on what Arakino's personality is like. Atu is frustrated that things had to spiral out of control right when Mainara was finally hitting its stride. Takuto reassures her that Arakino is still far away in the north, meaning she's not their immediate headache. Still, these threats have shown that Mainara desperately needs stronger defenses, so Takuto decides he's got to summon another hero and fast. Initially, he had planned to choose Isla, but considering recent developments, he'll probably have to go for a more combat-oriented option. Plus, his original strategy of staying hidden might need rethinking, especially with unpredictable threats like Arakino popping up, so they'll meet a alleged alliance soon. And Qualia is obviously out of the question after Atu brutally wiped out their paladins, but the nation to the east looks promising. They're neutral, haven't interacted with Mainara yet, and seem like potential ally material. So once the palace construction wraps up, Takuto plans on heading over there himself to size them up and see if teaming up is viable. At the same time over in that very same eastern city, they're getting slammed by a barbarian attack. Fortunately, their badass staff wielder annihilates the attackers effortlessly with a massive lightning strike. Citizens start cheering and praising her for protecting them, but she quickly reminds everyone it's way too early to celebrate because there's clearly a lot more trouble on the horizon. Back in Mainara, Atu and Takuto finish up their discussion, and as she's about to head out, she pauses, awkwardly apologizing for getting a bit carried away with the paladin earlier. She knows Takuto usually prefers avoiding unnecessary bloodshed, but Takuto just gives her a blank stare, calmly asks her why on earth she thinks he'd be bothered by that. That's when it hits her. Takuto might seem gentle, but at the end of the day, he's literally the physical embodiment of evil, so there's not much violence in this world that's gonna bother him. Not long after, work on Takuto's castle wraps up, and it feels like the first real push in his realm's rise. His heart jumps since a vast residence has been his quiet wish for years, and Atu promises with a grin that one day it will grow tall enough to stab the sky. Anyway, all that talk about halls and courtyards makes her notice something awkward. He may be the monarch, yet he has not a single personal aide, and although he never really considered it, a ruler without attendants looks strange, so Atu asks what kind of servant he would prefer so she can recruit one for him. Takuto answers with a shy smile that anyone is fine as long as they are easy to speak with, since he is terrible at conversation. He has barely exchanged more than a few words with the Dark Elves since arriving, which Atu says is mostly because he comes off to them like a dense cloud of gloomy energy. Even so, she tells him to relax because she already has a perfect plan in mind. Her enthusiasm makes his stomach knot, yet he swallows the worry and decides to let it play out to see what she does. Atu promptly calls Nagi, Molter, and Emil, then orders them to assemble every little girl in the village because the king desires them. Takuto and Molter both freeze at the wording, and Molter, trying to be fair, asks why she issued such a command. Atu's reasoning is that younger girls would be gentler partners while Takuto practices small talk, but instead of saying it plainly, she blurts that Takuto likes little girls. That goes too far, so Takuto cuts her off before she adds anything worse and tells her to explain herself properly without making him sound like a lolicon. Once the full explanation is out, Molter and the others exhale in relief since the king only wants an approachable attendant. He requested younger candidates because the kingdom is short on manpower, and he refuses to pull skilled adults from vital work just to serve him. Children who are not doing heavy labor yet seem like the least disruptive option, which is why he asked for them. Impressed by how considerate he is, Molter's group agrees to bring suitable children to meet him, and Takuto actually feels hopeful about finally having people he can talk with each day. There is one detail he forgot to account for, and it hits the instant the kids arrive. To ordinary villagers, he still looks like a disaster in human shape, his aura heavy enough to spook anyone, so the moment the children see him, they burst into tears. Takuto feels crushed after the fiasco with the children, and seeing his expression, Atu turns to Moltar and asks if there are any little ones who wouldn't burst into tears at the sight of their king. Given how things stand, Moltar cannot name a single safe choice. Nagi then asks whether Takuto has met the twins yet, but Molter admits that he kept them away because he doubted they would be suitable attendants. Their history is rough and he feared they might accidentally offend the king, but options are running thin, so Atu tells him to call them in regardless. A short while later, the twins step into the hall and introduce themselves as Karia and Maria. Karia bows with careful respect, voice steady, while Maria talks to Takuto in a breezy, familiar tone like she is chatting with an old friend. Atu reads the weariness in their eyes and the wariness in their posture, then gently asks Karia about the sores on her skin. Karia says they came from an illness, and Molter explains that she suffered through a plague some time ago. The sickness has passed, but the marks it left behind did not fade. Atu asks what scored Maria, and Karia answers that her sister endured something cruel and has never been the same since. Atu asks what she means, so Maria answers without hesitation that she ate her mother. The words hit like a slap, far worse than Atu expected, so she turns to Molter for an explanation. He says he is not proud of what happened, but in that moment it was the only path left, and the Dark Elf tribe still honors the sacrifice that Karia and Maria's mother made for them. Hearing that, Takuto remembers the long exile across brutal ground after the elves were driven out. In marches like that, hunger becomes a tyrant, and sometimes survival demands impossible choices, and the thought leaves his chest so tight. Being forced to eat her own mother cracked Maria's view of the world. The small grace is that she shows no fear of Takuto at all. Though Atu is uncertain, she would make a stable attendant. But while Atu weighs the idea, Maria pads over to the throne. Standing close, she peers up and says he looks white to her. Takuto blinks at that, surprised since almost everyone else describes him like walking darkness. But Maria sees something different. With a smile, he asks if she would be willing to serve as his attendant and look after him, and Maria nods and says she will try her best. So Takuto formally appoints her as his servant, and also as a candidate for leadership within the Great Minara. Atu is astonished because that is the longest back and forth Takuto has ever managed with anyone besides her. But despite Maria seeming willing, Karia has barely spoken, so Takuto gently asks for her thoughts on the offer. Karia says that as Maria's younger sister, she is duty-bound to stay at her side, and if Maria wishes to serve as Takuto's attendant, then Karia will stand with her and do the same. The answer makes Takuto visibly happy, and he tells them that starting today, they are responsible for looking after him, while Nagi and Molter trade uneasy looks at the choice. When the others file out, Molter approaches the throne and says there is something he must share about the twins. Since the day their mother died, they have not been able to feel even the smallest emotion, as if their hearts shut tight to survive. Keeping them as attendants will bring its own set of problems, yet Molter asks that Takuto meet those challenges with patience and tolerance until the girls slowly open up again. The next morning, Maria and Karia begin their official service, and the anicaps start right away. Maria walks in with a glass of water, catches her own toes, and splashes the whole thing on Takuto. Karia quickly offers a cloth, apologizing for her sister's slip, because this is not the only time something like this shit has happened. But Takuto calmly says it is fine and that he is not angry. Moments later, Atu enters, disappointed to see that Maria has botched another simple task, but Takuto asks her to go easy on them. Atu hates how often they fumble, yet if the king refuses to punish them, there is nothing she can do. She then reminds Takuto that he has a meeting on the schedule, and since they are his attendants, Maria and Karia are required to be present too, so they need to keep their manners tight. The council gathers soon after, and Emerald delivers the first report. She oversees construction, and with the palace finished, they now have a surplus of workers available. There is also a large stock of materials still in storage, so they are in a strong position to launch another project right away. Takuto and Atu back Emel's recommendation and authorize construction of a clinic at once, since they urgently need a place that safeguards the health and safety of Minara's citizens. Emel answers that she will mobilize crews immediately, and with building matters set for the moment, Atu asks to hear from whoever oversees resource collection. It turns out Emel also carries that portfolio, which means they will likely need to expand staff soon. She reports that gathering food and raw materials is proceeding smoothly, and thanks to Takuto's assistance, they have been securing daily necessities the nation cannot produce on its own. However, that method burns through a great deal of Takuto's mana, so alternative supply routes must be found soon. Because leaning on emergency production this often is not perfect, but for now, it is a critical cost. Takuto answers without hesitation that they can keep leaning on him, then adds that they must prioritize buildings and research that raises mana output so the burden eases over time. Atu then thanks Emel for the grind and moves the agenda to magic research. Molter rises to deliver his report. He has successfully devised military magic. But at the moment, he alone can wield it, but with enough practice, he is confident his subordinates will learn to do the same. And they may even be able to cast stronger spells by tapping the palace's supply of ruined mana. But since Takuto has made it clear he does not intend to start wars, opportunities to use that power should be rare. But for now, Atu instructs Moltar to concentrate on the 6 major elements in the magic skill tree, because those branches will best support national development. Then Atu asks Nagi for the army update, and he reports that their forces currently field 5 scout bugs, and most of their time has gone into mapping the unknown reaches of the accursed land. The terrain outside the forest is largely open plains, which lets them probe that region with a lower chance of being seen. Even so, stealth remains a top priority for Minara right now, so the scouts are operating under strict limits on how far and how boldly they can range. Atu says it is fine since they already have a thorough survey of the forest in hand, then tells Maggie to put the scouts on routine sweeps along the woodland perimeter. He asks if she truly wants every bug shifted to patrol duty, and she can read the worry about their current fighting strength. She answers that she alone can swat any threat that shows up, and on top of that, she and Takuto have already settled on creating a new hero, and Takuto adds that they will go ahead and summon Ezla after all. Takuto then asks whether all the prerequisites have been gathered, so Moltar reports that timber and rations are stocked and ready, though the heavy mana cost is still an issue. After plenty of back and forth and a little compromise, the council wraps and Takuto feels quietly proud of how well everyone is carrying their load. He then heads toward the throne chamber, papers in hand, when Maria bumps into him and sends the meeting documents skittering across the floor. Carriabos apologizes for her sister and hurries to help gather the pages, only for the two of them to tub the same sheet and tear it clean in half. They glance up, bracing for a scolding, but Takuto simply tells them it is all right and takes his seat without raising his voice. Maria steps closer and asks him straight if he is a bad person. By alignment, he counts as evil, so she follows by asking why he has not killed them yet. They have been bungling constantly and pulling mistakes that would get servants executed, yet he keeps sparing them, and they cannot comprehend why. So Takuto asks what they think separates a good person from a bad one. Maria answers that a good person only does good deeds and a bad person only does bad, but he tells her that is only half true. A good person must keep choosing the right thing, so they do not lie, they do not steal, and they do not kill without cause. But a bad person does not have to do the worst thing every time because they act out of self-interest and do what they want, whether others like it or not. In his case, what he wants is to treat them gently, so there's nothing wrong with letting small mistakes slide. And he adds that he already noticed they have been staging some of those blunders on purpose to try to make him furious. The sisters finally confess that all the mistakes were deliberate. They kept poking at boundaries, hoping he'd lose his temper and end them because in their heads, what they did means they don't deserve to keep living. Takuto understands why self-forgiveness feels unreachable after something like that. He can't truly stand in their shoes that he's certain their mother chose that sacrifice so her daughters would continue, not vanish. He tells them plainly that they are free, and the truest way to honor her choice is to live fully, not shrink into guilt. The road ahead will be rough and uneven, and some days will ache more than others, but he promises to stay beside them at every single step and shoulder what he can. The sisters crumble, tears pouring as they wrap him in a tight embrace, clinging until the storm in their chests eases. A few hours later, Atu walks in and finds both girls asleep across Takuto's throne. A tiny flash of jealousy pricks her, but business comes first, and she reports to him that the survey on the nearby city is done. The nearby city is called Dragonten, and it belongs to Fonkaven, a neutral nation where multiple races live side by side. So Takuto thinks that this diversity should make talks and trade more manageable with them. But he also flags a concern because Dragonten sits way off the trade path, and that location worries him. Atu explains the reason for that location. There's a dragon vein mine beneath the area, and those veins are prized since they naturally generate mana. Strategically, securing such a source early would be huge, so she recommends moving to safeguard it as soon as they can do so wisely. But the report also notes that Dragonten is currently under assault by barbarian groups like ogres and goblins, and the defenders are clearly struggling to hold the line. Takuto asks whether the city has received any backup from its homeland, and as far as Atu can tell, no reinforcements have been dispatched, so conditions are improving, and if anything, they're sliding. Given that picture, he assumes refugees are already on the roads. If Minara opens its gates and shelters those people, they can strengthen their population while building goodwill with Dragonten, and down the line, that partnership could place the Dragon Vein mine within Minara's reach. Takuto then orders Atu to assemble an envoy at once, but on the road to the city, Atu's party runs into a band of beastkin in the middle of the wilds, and the tension spikes. Tonukapali, their leader, is terrified of Atu and the others, since a darkness so dense it's visible clings to them. She works hard to keep things calm because her men are so petrified they might lash out at the two in fear, and that could get everyone eliminated. Atu is still under strict orders to keep Minara a secret, so she is preparing to erase every witness on the spot. Yet Pepe is too oblivious to grasp the danger she represents, and he casually asks her name and strikes up a conversation, a move so brazen and foolish that it catches Atu off guard and makes her stay her hand for now. In time, the two groups manage to reach an understanding, and Atu learns that Tonukapoli's party is actually an envoy from Dragonton. That turns out to be a lucky break since it saves her the trip, so she invites Tonukapoli and her people to come meet the king of Manara. Tonukapoli is a little on edge since any king who can command someone as vigorous as Atu is bound to be frightening. And when she finally meets Takuto, it is worse than she imagined because all she can perceive is an endless gulf of darkness, so she's really starting to regret the choice she made before. Then we see that before they cross paths with Atu, the group had been attacked by a giant out in the barren lands. So Pip, one of the staff bearers, used grass magic to locate the giant and drag it down. Sadly, with brain power apparently stuck in the single digits, he doesn't think things through, so instead of finishing the damn job, he stands on its chest and starts demanding applause for his magic. And predictably, the giant tears free and flings Pape aside. But just before it can crush him, Tonukapoli steps in and weaves grass and earth magic together, pinning the giant hard against a rock, then tells her men to kill it. Tonukapoli then turns around and smacked the shit out of Peep's head, and told him to quit acting like a damn fool, because as the lone junior staff bearer, people's lives may one day hinge on his choices. Peep says he will try his best, yet he plainly fails to grasp how serious his role is. If giants keep battering Dragonton, it is only a matter of time before the city is wiped out, and they have no clue what is provoking the attacks in the first place. Their lone lead is a rumor about a calamity surfacing in the accursed lands, so Tonukapoli said she planned to investigate and drill a little responsibility into Pepe while she was at it. She dragged him along, and now she regrets that choice because one wrong move from him could get them all executed. Soon after, Peg blurts out and asks Takuto to be friends, and Tonukapoli panics, and speaking so brazenly to a king could merit execution. She apologizes and tries to cover for his outburst, but to her shock, Takuto actually seemed pleased by the offer and says he would be happy to be friends with him. Afterward, a welcoming banquet is prepared for Pepe and Tonukapoli's party, and once everyone takes their seats, Maria and Carria bring each of them a glass of apple juice. Tonukapoli sips and is astonished because she has never tasted anything this good, and the quality of the glassware here surpasses the work of the finest artisan on the continent. Pape loves the juice too, so he asks Maria for another pour, and before the extra drink even arrives, he bounds out of his chair and starts praising Maggie for his massive muscles. Then he goes to show off his magic to Moltar, and everyone lets him do as he likes, since Takuto seems fond of him. Takuto is struck by how effortlessly social Pepe is in any situation, and he is glad they managed to become friends, but he has never actually had a friend before and does not quite know what friends are supposed to do together. Then, while Tonukapoli scolds Pepe, Takuto caught his attention and asks whether he would like to play a game. The room falls silent for a moment because no one expected those words, and Takuto begins to feel awkward. Then Peep cheerfully agrees to play with him, so the two of them sit down together to play. They start with a game Peep invents on the spot, where each of them takes a single blade of grass and they tug against each other to see which strand snaps first. Tonukapoli fears Takuto might feel slighted by such a simple pastime, yet he's clearly having a great time. They keep playing for a while, and Pepe tries several of the games Takuto dreamed up. He says it was a blast and even suggests Takuto could sell them in Dragonton, but Tonukapoli slices him off because it isn't Peep's damn place to make important decisions on behalf of their city like that. Takuto is actually relieved that Pepe mentioned trade, since he's been planning to open negotiations with Dragonton for some time. But before he can move forward, he knows he'll have to put aside their personal friendship and approach the matter purely as a ruler. After they finish eating, Atu calls Tonukapoli over and asks her straight out why she came to the accursed lands in the first place. The question clearly unsettles her, but she answers honestly. Her homeland has been under relentless assault from the barbarians. Atu is startled that the barbarians are striking Dragonton when they typically steer clear of big cities, and Tonukapoli says that is exactly why she came to uncover what could be driving their behavior. Takuto then asks if that means Dragonton lacks the military strength to fight the barbarians effectively, and Tonukapoli's pulse jumps because if he learns how bad things are in Dragonton, Minara might decide to overthrow them rather than negotiate. She lies and says Dragonton still has sufficient power to drive the barbarians off, while insisting their unusual movements demanded inquiry regardless. Her explanation convinces everyone that Dragonton can still handle itself. But then Pepe, bless his big mouth, blurts out that he's confused, since earlier Tonukapoli told him they were here because Dragonton would be doomed if they don't learn why the barbarians are attacking. Ado can't help pitying Tonukapoli for having to wrangle Pete constantly, but she and Takuto make it plain that they have no designs on Dragonten so she can relax. For the moment, their attention is fixed on internal rebuilding, so launching wars or swallowing neighbors isn't on the agenda. The barbarians, though, are a different matter, and that threat cannot simply be shrugged off. Because if Dragonten were to collapse under the barbarians, Minara sits next door and would be the next target, which makes the problem theirs too. Anicaps is startled and asks if that means they're prepared to step in, because after overstretching to build a town by the Dragon Vein, Dragonten will topple if nothing changes. Atu turns to Takuto for the call, and he says he wants to stand by his friend, so he is willing to provide whatever aid is needed. Thrilled, Anicaps still asks what he wants in return, since the idiot Pape has already blurted how damn desperate Dragonten's situation is. Atu answers without ceremony that they want the Dragon Vein, and Anicaps had prayed that it would not come up, yet in her current bind she cannot refuse. Atu adds that there is no need to fret since she and Takuto are fine with joint stewardship of the Dragon Vein with Dragonten. For now, their man-to-man is small, but they want the exclusive right to decide the Vein's elemental conversion. That revelation stuns Anicaps because Minara already has the method to convert raw mana into elemental power, a milestone that would have taken Dragonten 10 more years. It becomes obvious that Minara's society is well ahead of theirs, so an alliance would pay huge dividends. Even so, tradition says the call belongs to Pepe. And he may be a fool at times, yet as the youngest staff bearer, he is by extension the nation's future ruler. He also reads people well, so she asks if he wants to proceed with the alliance, and Peep says he wants to be buddies with everyone in Minara. And with that settled, the two realms make the alliance official. Not long after, Atu convenes a strategy session to lock in the terms with Dragonten. Minara will ship a stream of consumables to their city, and in return, Dragonten will deliver metalware and everyday essentials. Molter welcomes the arrangement. Until now, they had leaned on Takuto to furnish those supplies, but the standout gain is direct access to the Dragon Vein. Credit also goes to Pepe, because if he hadn't blurted out Dragonten's true condition, Anicaps' bluff confidence would have held and diplomacy would have gone nowhere. In that case, Dragonten might have collapsed long before Minara could lend any help. Takuto even wonders if Pepe is actually a fool or if he nudged events on purpose to reach the best result. Switching topics, Atu says they need a plan for managing relations with Dragonten from here on. Maria and Curia trade puzzled looks and ask whether anyone actually knows what Dragonten is like as a country. They chase the negotiations so hard they forgot they have never set foot there, and real alliance maintenance means understanding an ally's culture and values. When Takuto was playing the game, forging friendship took a single tap, so it never occurred to him that keeping it now would demand sustained effort. Given the gaps, Atu proposes their first move be to scout the capital Crescent Moon, even though it sits far from Minara. However, a detailed look would take quite a while, so Takuto suggests postponing that for now, since the immediate priority is helping Dragonten repel the giants. Even so, Molter reminds them that visiting another nation isn't something you just do, there are protocols to follow. Maria and Curia then raise their hands and ask if they could simply go for fun, and childish as it sounds, the idea is actually smart. If they treat it as a friendly call before sending an official mission, they can set out immediately. Molter then volunteers to go, but Takuto feels he's far too senior to serve as a courier. To the other side, Molter would read as Minara's top arcane chancellor, which makes him a non-starter. The same logic applies to Nagi and Emil, whose posts are equally critical. What they meet is a trusted face that Takuto can vouch for, who is not overly high in rank. And right on cue, Maria and Curia lift their hands to volunteer. Takuto turns the idea down on the spot, worried the trip could be risky. So Atu offers to take the assignment, but Molter reminds her she is Takuto's most trusted confidant, and aside from Takuto, arguably the most indispensable person present. Maria and Curia then step up to Takuto and remind him that he granted them the freedom to make their own choices. So right now they want to do everything they can to help him, even if it is risky. Takuto hesitates to approve the mission, but he cannot bring himself to refuse those earnest faces, so he eventually agrees to let them go. And Atu sulks, jealous that Takuto yielded to someone else's cuteness. Emil still voices concerns about sending the pair alone. Takuto says it is fine since he already has skill escorts in mind. After the council breaks, Takuto returns to the throne room, and Atu is still pouting about his capitulation to Maria and Curia's request, leaving him unsure how to proceed. He turns to Maria for advice, and she says he should tell Atu exactly how he feels, so he decides to give it a try. He walks up to Atu and apologizes for making her feel uncomfortable. But she does not need to fear about being replaced because he is extremely thankful for everything Atu does for him and for the fact that she is always at his side. So he tells her there is no one he would rather be with, and that is all Atu needed to hear. In fact, she is already picturing a happily married life with Takuto, and while he has no freaking idea what is running through her head, he is simply glad she is no longer upset. A little later, Takuto leaves Maria, Karia, and Atu to the clinic, though none of them understands why he brought them there since no one is ill. Takuto explains that the clinic was inexpensive to build, so he went ahead and put it up on a whim. But since Maria and Karia will soon head out on a mission, he figures he may as well assign the new plague doctors he created to escort them as protectors. This was the end of episode 7. Subscribe to not miss the next episode.